My rich uncle took me in after my parents abandoned me at 13. 15 years later, they showed up at his will reading hoping for millions, until the lawyer read one sentence that stunned the entire room. If you asked me to pick the exact point when my family decided I was more of an afterthought than a son, I'd have to say it was my 13th birthday. Not the birthday with candles, gifts, and the whole singing routine. No, that year they packed their bags for a proper vacation, the kind with beaches, cocktails, and postcards, and they didn't take me along. What I got was a scribbled note stuck to the fridge: stay at a friend's. Back in a week. Love you. The catch? They forgot to say which friend was supposed to put me up. At first, I figured it had to be some kind of mistake. I sat on the porch with my backpack, waiting for someone, maybe my aunt, maybe my grandma, to swing by and scoop me up. Nobody showed. The hours dragged on, streetlights blinked awake, and even the neighbor's dog barked at me like I didn't belong there. Eventually, I gave up, went inside, nuked a sad burrito, and faced the truth. They'd really gone on vacation without me. I wasn't invited to my own family trip. I'd seen favoritism before, sure. My big brother, Evan, was the golden boy, varsity jacket, shiny new bike, tutors for every subject. My little sister, Sophie, had ballet recitals, braces, and birthday parties complete with pony rides. And me? I was the so-called responsible middle child. I got stickers, chores, and the occasional pat on the back for mowing the lawn. But this, leaving me behind on purpose, was a whole new category of wrong kid. That week was the loneliest I'd ever lived through. I crashed on the couch because the silence in my own bedroom felt haunted. I pedaled to the library every day just to sit in air conditioning and keep the emptiness from gnawing at me. Sometimes I imagined the phone ringing, my parents laughing, telling me it was all some elaborate joke. But the call never came. By the 5th day, I was half convinced they weren't coming back at all. I pictured them driving off into the sunset, deciding 2 kids were plenty and forgetting about the spare. On the 6th day, everything shifted. I was walking home from the library, clutching a stack of books like a shield, when a sleek black car slowed beside me. Around my neighborhood, a car like that usually meant trouble or someone lost. The window rolled down, and I saw a face I hadn't seen in years. Older now, sharper. Kiddo? That you? It was my Uncle Daniel. The rich one. The one who'd skipped every Thanksgiving for over a decade because, according to my mom, he was too full of himself for family. Looking back, that probably just meant he had some boundaries. He gave me a once-over, frowning at the sight of my overstuffed backpack. Why are you walking home alone? Where are your parents? I let out a dry laugh that sounded more like a cough. Florida, with Evan and Sophie. His jaw literally dropped. And they just left you here? Pretty much, I said. He muttered something under his breath about how it was just like my dad back in the day, then told me to get in the car. Every nerve in my brain screamed stranger danger, but my stomach made the final call. It had been 3 nights of ramen noodles. I slid into leather seats that smelled like money and cologne while the AIC blasted like heaven. He drove us to a diner and ordered me the kind of meal I'd only seen in commercials: burger, fries, milkshake. When the waitress set it down, I nearly cried. That night, Uncle Daniel asked me more about my life than my parents had in the past year. School, friends, what I wanted to do when I grew up. Half joking, I said, alive. He didn't laugh. He just looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're coming with me." And right then, my life split in two. Before, when I was the forgotten kid left on the porch, and after, when I became the nephew of the only man who noticed I was there. I didn't realize it that night, but that car ride wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of a 15-year apprenticeship in how to build a life. One day, it would all lead to a showdown in a lawyer's office, with my parents across the table expecting millions. But that's jumping ahead. For now, I was just a scrawny 13-year-old with ketchup on my face, stunned that someone finally gave a damn. Moving in with Uncle Daniel didn't feel like moving in with family. It was like landing on another planet, one where the air smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee instead of microwave leftovers and bitterness. That first night, I sat stiffly on the edge of a guest bed so soft it felt like marshmallows. Daniel poked his head in and asked, "You planning to sleep sitting up like Dracula?" I mumbled something about not wanting to mess up the sheets. He blinked, then laughed. "Kid, it's called laundry. Sheets aren't sacred." That was lesson number 1. Things in his house were meant to be used, not feared. At breakfast the next morning, he poured orange juice into a real glass. At home, we only drank from beat-up plastic cups with faded carnival logos. I hesitated, and he raised an eyebrow. It's juice, not a contract. Drink. Then he asked me about school, and I braced myself for the usual lecture. The Evan gets straight A's, why can't you? Line. But instead, he asked what subjects I actually liked. I froze. No one had ever asked that like it mattered. History, I admitted. But only the weird stuff. Like how Napoleon was actually average height, but people thought he was tiny. Daniel chuckled. So, you like the stories people get wrong. That hit harder than it should have. For once, someone wasn't correcting me. They were just listening. The adjustment wasn't smooth, though. I didn't know how to handle kindness. When he bought me new clothes, I hid the tags in a drawer because I figured he'd want to return them. When he gave me cash for lunch, I hoarded it and skipped meals so I wouldn't waste it. By the second week, he caught me in the kitchen eating dry cereal at midnight. Why aren't you using the fridge like a normal person? He asked, standing there in sweatpants that probably cost more than my old bike. I shrugged. I don't want to, take too much. He stared at me for a long moment, then opened the fridge, grabbed leftover pasta, microwaved it, and slid the plate in front of me. Here's the deal. Uncle Daniel told me one night. If it's in my house, it's yours too. Got it? I nodded, chewing spaghetti and trying not to let the tears fall into the sauce. When my parents finally rolled back from Florida, I half expected them to storm up to Daniel's door and demand I be returned like some piece of misplaced luggage. But days turned into weeks, and nobody came. No phone calls, no messages. Apparently, Evan's beach selfies and Sophie's seashell collection were more important than checking if their middle kid was still breathing. Daniel, on the other hand, kept showing up. He came with me to a school meeting, the first adult who had ever done that. And when the teacher asked if he was my guardian, he just said, I am now. Just like that, no hesitation. He had money, sure, but what floored me was the way he used it so casually to patch holes I hadn't even noticed were there. A proper desk for homework. Glasses after I bombed an eye exam. A dentist appointment I didn't know I'd needed. And never once did he say, you owe me. He just called it maintenance, like taking care of a car before it breaks down. Slowly, that permanent knot in my stomach started to loosen. My grades climbed. I stopped flinching every time someone said my name, bracing for a lecture that never came. And lying on that marshmallow bed at night, I began to believe, just maybe, I wasn't the disposable kid after all. Still, I stayed cautious. Because if your own parents can drop you like expired coupons, what's stopping anyone else? It took years before I fully trusted that Daniel wasn't waiting for me to screw up so he could send me packing. But for the first time in 13 years, I had something I'd never had before, a future. While my parents were busy curating vacation albums, I was quietly building something they couldn't see, something that would one day leave their jaws hanging in a lawyer's office. By the time I turned 14, Daniel had nailed 2 facts about me. 1, my posture was garbage. 2, I had potential, even if it was hiding under the slouch. He'd tap my shoulders when I hunched and say, you're not a question mark, kid. Stand up straight. People believe you more when you look like you believe yourself. Teachers noticed the change almost instantly. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible, not all the way, at least. I started raising my hand in class. I even joined debate club, mostly because Daniel bribed me with pizza to give it a try. He showed up to my first meet in a tailored suit, clapping like I'd won the Super Bowl when all I'd done was argue that cats were objectively better than dogs. At home, he wasn't just a guardian. He was like a one-man motivational seminar, except without the cheesy posters. He taught by showing. He dragged me along to his meetings, told me to watch how people spoke, how they shook hands. Half of success is tone and grip, he said once. The other half is just showing up when no one else does. Of course, I still tested limits. I was a kid. Once, I stayed out too late at a buddy's house and never called. I crept in around midnight, bracing for an explosion. Instead, he handed me a sandwich and said, glad you're alive. Next time, text. Otherwise, I'll assume you're in a ditch and hire a search party. His calm was scarier than any yelling. I never skipped check-ins again. He could have spoiled me rotten with his money, but he didn't. When I wanted a new video game, he just said, cool, get a job. So I bagged groceries at the corner store. My first paycheck was $68, and I waved it at him like I'd struck gold. He grinned, marched me to the bank, and taught me how to open an account. Save half, spend half. That way you can enjoy today without bankrupting tomorrow. I rolled my eyes then, but those words stuck. Later, when my parents came sniffing around for handouts, that lesson was why I didn't cave. Holidays were the strangest adjustment. My first Christmas at Daniel's, I expected cold indifference, maybe a gift card. Instead, he handed me a leather journal with my initials stamped on the cover. Nothing flashy, just thoughtful. Write down what you notice, he said. Even the dumb stuff. Especially the dumb stuff. Meanwhile, my parents sent a group text. Evan unwrapping a brand new laptop. Sophie modeling designer boots. No mention of me. Not even a Merry Christmas. Just a digital reminder I'd been erased from their family album. I thought it would crush me. But staring at that journal in my lap, I realized something wild. I wasn't jealous. I was relieved. I didn't want back into their world. By 16, Daniel trusted me enough to help out at his office over the summers. The work wasn't glamorous, filing papers, running errands, praying I wouldn't jam the copier, but it felt like stepping into a life I could own. The suits intimidated me at first. Everyone seemed born knowing how to tie ties and say synergy with a straight face. My first introduction came out cracked and squeaky, like a broken kazoo. Later, Daniel pulled me aside and said, "Relax. They put their pants on one leg at a time. Some even trip doing it. Don't let the ties fool you." That dumb joke carried me through every handshake that summer. By senior year, I had something I never thought possible: confidence. Not the loud, spoiled swagger Evan flaunted, but a quieter kind, like a lamp left on in the dark. Just enough to guide me forward. I still peeked at my parents' lives from a distance. Social media full of vacations, graduations, Sophie's recitals. My name never appeared, but it didn't hurt anymore. Their silence wasn't a wound. It was proof I'd built something stronger elsewhere. And Daniel, he never tried to replace my dad. He didn't need to. He just kept showing up, steady as a drumbeat, reminding me I mattered. One night, right before I left for college, we sat on his balcony overlooking the city lights. He handed me a soda, clinked his whiskey glass against it, and said, "You've come a long way from that kid waiting on a porch with a backpack." I laughed and said, "Yeah, still can't believe you stopped for me that day." Daniel just shrugged, but his eyes softened in that way they did when he meant more than he was saying. Best wrong turn I ever made. I didn't know it yet, but 15 years later those words would echo in a lawyer's office where my parents would finally remember I existed, sitting across from me, waiting for millions that were never going to be theirs. College was never supposed to be in the cards for me, at least not in the life my parents had sketched out. Evan was the college track star. Sophie was headed for some fancy dance conservatory. And me? I was the figure-it-out-yourself kid. If it hadn't been for Daniel, my tuition would have stayed a dream scribbled on napkins. But he didn't just write a check and call it a day. He sat me down with spreadsheets, charts, and a lecture so long I wished I could have faked the flu to get out of it. Scholarships first, grants second, then I'll cover the cracks. But you're not floating through 4 years on my dime. You're going to own this. So I applied for every scholarship I could find. Some were downright bizarre. There was one for left-handed students. I actually trained myself to write lefty in 2 weeks, and another for descendants of beekeepers. I wrote a heartfelt essay about honey, even though my only experience was getting stung when I was 8. Enough small awards stacked up to make a dent, and Daniel covered the rest, with one condition. If you drop out to become a professional kazoo player, I want a full refund. On move-in day, he hauled boxes up 3 flights of stairs like it was some corporate team-building exercise. Parents around us were snapping pictures, hugging, crying. Mine didn't show. Not a call. Not even a pity emoji. I should have been crushed. Instead, I watched Daniel sweating in $1,000 sneakers and thought, this guy cares more about my future than they ever did. College was rough at first. I felt like an imposter with my thrift store sheets and awkward grin, but I learned fast. I joined clubs, made friends who didn't know me as the forgotten kid, and even landed an internship. Every week, I called Daniel to update him. He never acted bored. Sometimes he'd even clap sarcastically through the phone. "Look at you, Mr. Dean's List. Try not to get too famous before finals." By sophomore year, I had a reputation as the reliable one, the kid who showed up early, stayed late, and didn't flake. Funny how the thing that once made me invisible at home turned out to be my strongest card in the real world. Daniel never let me forget balance, though. Whenever I stressed too hard, he'd drag me out to dinner. "You can't save the world if you burn out before dessert," he'd say over steak. I'd roll my eyes, but deep down, I needed the reminder. Meanwhile, my parents kept parading their perfect family online. Evan's law school updates, Sophie's recitals, vacations I was never invited to. In their world, I didn't exist. I was a ghost scrolling their feed, shaking my head. But ghosts, it turns out, can build empires. By graduation, I wasn't just walking across a stage. I had real job offers, salaries that made my grocery store paychecks look like pocket change. Daniel sat front row, clapping so loud the dean gave him side-eye. After the ceremony, he handed me a pen. Not for autographs, for contracts. Use it wisely. My first job was at a mid-sized logistics firm in operations. Day one, I walked in with a suit too big and shoes that squeaked like dog toys. I figured I'd be laughed out of the place. But I learned fast, squeaky shoes don't matter when you get the work done. Within months, my name was popping up in meetings. I kept my head down, listened, and when I finally spoke, I made it count. Every milestone, promotion, raise, surviving brutal weeks, Daniel was there. Sometimes with advice, sometimes with whiskey, sometimes with a sarcastic, "About time you caught up, kid." And little by little, I built something my parents couldn't have imagined. Independence, stability, a life made of choice instead of scraps. That didn't mean the absence of family stopped stinging. Holidays still hurt. My inbox stayed empty. But I filled the gaps differently, with friends who became family, mentors who believed in me, and the man who had once pulled over on a random street and decided I mattered. Every step I took was laying the foundation for the day my parents would finally look me in the eye again, not with pride, but with desperation, as a lawyer's voice turned the air into glass. By my mid-20s, life had spun a full 180. I went from the kid eating ramen in silence to the guy co-leading meetings where people actually scribbled notes when I spoke. My name showed up in reports, my inbox filled with questions instead of orders, and I even scored an apartment without mold crawling up the walls. Daniel kept me grounded. "Nice job, hotshot," he'd say when I bragged about a promotion. "But don't forget, I can still ground you." And I honestly believed him. My job boiled down to fixing problems no one else wanted. Broken supply chains, angry clients, systems that ran slower than dial-up internet. I became the guy people called when the fire alarm went off. Colleagues nicknamed me the firefighter. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but when things blew up, I was the one they trusted. Every time I thought about how far I'd come, the truth circled back. If Daniel hadn't stopped that day, none of it would have happened. He was still my anchor. We met weekly, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just coffee, and every time he checked in like it was second nature. But around then, I noticed something new. He was getting older. It started small. The way he rubbed his shoulder after carrying groceries. How he squinted at menus, pulling out reading glasses. The cough he waved off like it was nothing. One night, I saw him staring too long at a bottle of pills on the counter. I asked and he just shrugged. "Blood pressure. Comes with living too long." And tried to laugh it off, but I felt that familiar knot tighten in my gut. He kept refusing to slow down, still showed up at my first conference presentation in a suit sharp enough to cut glass, sat front and center, and afterward grabbed my hand in front of everyone saying, "This guy used to sleep in libraries because no one wanted him. Now he's running the show," which made me want to melt into the carpet and also made me prouder than I'd ever been. Meanwhile, my parents kept performing their selective memory Broadway show online. Evan thriving at law school, Sophie touring with a dance company, every family snap a glossy ad for happiness, my name nowhere to be seen. I stopped looking for it. Their erasure stopped being my wound and became just another pattern of theirs. If they couldn't acknowledge me when I was a mess, they didn't deserve to claim me when I wasn't. Daniel, though, kept me grounded. After a raise, he slid an envelope across the table, the receipt for the first work shoes he'd bought me at 14. "Frame it," he said, "so you don't forget who you are under the suit." I tacked that receipt above my desk not to punish them, but as a bridge between who I'd been and who I'd become. Still, time cast its shadow. He started canceling dinners more often, blaming work fatigue, waving off my offers to reschedule with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Small things. He held the railing going upstairs. It took him an extra beat to stand. There was a little pill organizer on his counter like a mute witness, and we both pretended not to notice. That was our quiet pact. Even tired, he was still Daniel, pulling me aside to see the bigger picture. "You're doing well at work," he said once after I'd vented about a project. "But remember, jobs will replace you in a week. People won't, if you pick the right ones." It hit me harder than any quarterly review. I was climbing fast. Promotions came, my name started carrying weight, but I always made time for him because he'd given me the shot at any of it. Around my 29th birthday, I noticed he'd lost too much weight. He joked about finally shedding a winter coat, but his laugh sounded thin. I offered to take him to the doctor, and he waved me off. "Doctors tell you what you already know. Eat less salt. Walk more. Stop yelling at the news." I'm fine. But he wasn't. A few months later, he just collapsed in a boardroom. No drama. Just his body saying it was done. Overnight in the hospital, wires and monitors and that grin. "Don't look so serious." I told them I wanted a free night's stay. But behind it I saw the truth. He wasn't invincible. Sitting beside his bed, he got quiet and said, "I always figured your dad would teach you this stuff." Glad it was me. I swallowed hard. "Don't talk like that," I said. He smirked. "Like what?" "Honest." He shifted, winced, then said, "Life's short. But you've already outpaced every expectation. Remember, you're not the spare. You never were." I blinked fast because crying at him felt like cheating, and he muttered, "If you ruin my sheets with tears, I'm sending you the dry cleaning bill." Because of course he had to land a joke. He came home, but things had changed. We both knew time was shrinking. The last holiday we spent together, he handed me a small box. The leather journal he'd given me at 14, now filled with his handwriting, notes, advice, sarcastic comments, doodles, and on the last page, in his blocky print, he'd written, "If they ever try to erase you again, remember this. You've already written your own chapter." I didn't fully feel the weight of those words then, not like I would later, but I kept that journal close. Months on a Tuesday morning before dawn, his assistant called, and I learned he'd passed away quietly in his sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall for a long time, trying to make sense of a world that could spin without him. And of course I handled the funeral arrangements because who else would? He'd been the one who showed up, so I showed up for him. Nobody else could name his favorite hymns, knew which suit he actually liked, or remembered that he hated lilies and preferred plain roses. And since the man had pulled me out of the gutter at 13, the least I could do was make sure his send-off didn't look like a Pinterest fail. The service was small and dignified. Colleagues in dark suits who respected him because he was steady, not because of money, and a few old friends told stories that made the room laugh and wince in equal measure. Just when I thought I might get through the day without falling apart, my parents walked in. Evan led the way, tall and smug in a lawyer's suit. Sophie shading her eyes with sunglasses that looked like they could hide a trilogy of hangovers. And there they were clutching each other like they'd lost their best friend rather than the uncle they hadn't spoken to in years. Mom had the wounded widow act down to an art, even though she wasn't the widow, and Dad shook hands with strangers like a campaigner, smiling at people he clearly didn't know. They didn't look my way until halfway through, and when they finally did, it was like they'd seen a ghost. I gave a polite nod and nothing else. After the burial, they cornered me by the reception table. "Oh, sweetheart, we had no idea you were so close to him," Mom cooed, clutching my arm, and I stepped back. "You didn't ask," I said. Dad leaned into his solemn patriarch voice. "Your uncle was a remarkable man, generous, successful, truly part of the family." The word family almost made me laugh. These were the same people who'd abandoned me at 13 with a sticky note on the fridge, yet now, standing on Daniel's property, they'd suddenly remembered I existed. Evan tried to be casual. "So, any idea when the will reading is?" I mean, Uncle Daniel was, well off. Sophie sighed like she was rehearsing sorrow and tossed out, "I just hope he wanted us to keep the family legacy. Houses, cars, that sort of thing." I stared at them so long I wasn't sure if they were real or just extras in a bad sitcom. His body hadn't even been in the ground a full day, and already they were circling. I walked away without answering. The calls started that week. "We should reconnect." Evan left in voicemails about family responsibility. Sophie sending heart emojis like we'd ever truly been close. Transparent as anything. Almost funny if it hadn't been so gross. The lawyer handling Daniel's estate called next. The reading was set for Monday, and he warned me it would be eventful. Apparently, my uncle had been very specific about his wishes. That night I sat with the filled journal he'd left me and read the last line again. If they ever try to erase you again, remember this. You've already written your own chapter. For the first time since his death, I smiled, because I knew what was coming and I knew my parents weren't ready. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old money. Dark wood, heavy curtains, chairs that were more posture than comfort, and my family sat on one side of the long table, entitlement dressed as grief. I sat opposite them, journal on my lap, heart pounding but my face calm. Mr. Halpern adjusted his glasses and read the formalities. Debts cleared, small bequests to charities, gifts to longtime employees, while my relatives shifted impatiently like kids waiting for dessert. Then he turned a page and said, "Now, regarding the distribution of Mr. Carlton's estate." And you could see Evan lean forward and Sophie squeeze Mom's hand like the lottery was about to be called. Halpern's voice slowed, and every syllable landed like a stone. To my estranged relatives, who only remembered my existence in the shadow of my bank account, I leave nothing. The room snapped. Mom gasped. Evan's jaw actually dropped. Sophie whispered, "He's joking, right?" But Halpern didn't flinch. He turned another page and read, "To my nephew, Mike," and looked at me with a warmth that caught me off guard. "Who was left behind at 13 but never left my side since. I leave the entirety of my estate, including all assets, properties, accounts, and holdings." Silence fell so heavy you could hear it. Then every head in the room whipped toward me like someone had shouted fire. Evan sputtered first. "This can't be legal. You barely knew him." And I tapped the journal in my lap. "He knew me well enough to fill 15 years of advice in this," I said. Dad's face flushed, and he accused me of manipulation, of poisoning Daniel against the family, and I leaned back the way Daniel had taught me to and said, calm as a verdict, "You started this the day you left me with a note on the fridge." Sophie switched tactics, syrupy sweet. "Come on, Mike, you can't seriously keep all of it. We're family." I smiled, not viciously, just tired. Funny, 15 years of silence didn't feel very family until money showed up. Mr. Halpern snapped his folder shut and said the will was airtight. Any contest would be dismissed. He'd been thorough. That was it. I walked out with Daniel's words looping in my head. "You're not the spare. You never were." And for the first time I truly believed him. Behind me my relatives erupted into noise, their voices rising as they argued and tried to process the fact their golden ticket had been burned in front of them. I didn't look back. Outside the air felt sharper, cleaner, like a page turned. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, and texted the one person who mattered. "Wish you were here to see their faces, old man." If heaven had Wi-Fi, I knew Daniel would have laughed his head off.